My father retired from the military on February 1st, 1960, and 3 days later I was born. My mom swears I was a planned pregnancy, but who on God's earth plans to have a child the day they retire? Mr. Contest Master, fellow Toastmasters, and anyone that's ever reminisced about their dad. His retirement income was $86 a month. So he worked as a short order cook at Denny's and IHOP and places like that. You've seen people like him before, flipping pancakes, scrambling eggs. He didn't really talk that much, and I didn't get to know him very well when I was a child. And when I was 18, he passed away. A couple years later, I decided to join the Army, and a recruiter came over to my house to sign me up. On our living room wall, we had this plaque with all of his medals on it. And the recruiter was really interested in these medals. I want to share with you the 3 medals that were on top. I think you recognize this, right? The Purple Heart. Underneath it was the Combat Infantry Badge. For those of you who don't know about military badges, when you join the infantry, you get this blue badge with a rifle on it. When you go into combat, you get a reef around it. And next time in combat, a star. And next time, a star. After a year in the Army, I learned you don't mess with guys that have reefs and stars around their medals. Underneath it was this unusual badge. And this young recruiter had never seen it before. He was actually so intrigued by it, he said he was going to go to the library over the weekend and research it. I didn't know the relevance of the badge, even though it had been on the wall for 10 years. That night over coffee, I asked my mom to tell me about my dad and tell me about this badge. Mom says Dad was the shyest, kindest person she had ever known. When they met, he was 16 years old and working in a restaurant bussing tables. And he would keep just enough as his paycheck to make it to the following week, and he'd give the rest away to his friends who couldn't find work. He lied about his age and joined the Army in 1942. And like most young men, he was shipped over to Europe. In 1944, the Allied forces invaded Normandy and started that trek to Germany. But General Eisenhower had made a strategic error. He had sent almost all of his troops to one part and just a small contingency to another. And this small little group of soldiers over here found themselves surrounded by 45 divisions of Germans. Now they had radio contact back then. They were calling headquarters saying, "We're under fire right now." But it was going to take 2 weeks to reposition the troops. Or would it? This is a glider plane. That funny thing on the top is a big hook that would pull the plane. You can see the star in the middle there denoting that someone flew it into combat. The Army had this great idea in World War II. They were going to build these glider planes out of plywood. It'd hold 15 soldiers. One of the soldiers would train for 2 hours to be a pilot, you know, just learning how to move the levers back and forth. And another plane would grab it by a rope and pull it, and then they'd cut the rope and it'd glide down and it'd land right in the middle of combat. Now check me if I'm wrong. That sounds to me like the stupidest idea I've ever heard in my entire life. A plywood plane pulled by a rope? Now what does this have to do with my dad? Well, he volunteered to be a glider pilot. And on that day when these soldiers needed help, the Army flew in thousands and thousands of these plywood planes. Of the soldiers that survived the landing, they got out and conducted hand-to-hand combat for 2 solid weeks. This was known as the Battle of the Bulge. It was the largest and bloodiest battle of World War II. When it was over, 100,000 soldiers were wounded, 20,000 dead. That battle ended World War II. I think every young boy clutches comic books looking for their superhero. We don't learn until later in life that there's hidden heroes all around us. You don't see their Superman costumes because they're underneath ordinary clothing, like a close apron. Who is your hidden hero? A coworker? A neighbor?
You're to yellow, Jim.
I'm good to go?
You're yellow.
Okay. Who is your hidden hero? A coworker? A neighbor? Yeah, I'm really having problems with this last one. Learn about their story before it's too late. And don't worry about these medals, because the real heroes aren't featured on the History Channel. They're just quietly taking care of business. My dad wasn't a short order cook. He was a hidden hero, a superhero, flipping pancakes so I could have food and a place to live. You see, Dad, I finally figured it out. I know, it took me 53 years, but I finally figured it out. You were my hidden hero, Mr. Contest Master.